In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan chats with Boulder, Colorado innovator Robin Thurston, CEO and founder of Outside Interactive Inc., home to iconic brands like Outside Magazine, Warren Miller, and Pink Pike. Robin is revolutionizing how active lifestyle enthusiasts consume content, find gear, and engage with the outdoors. Before Outside, Robin built MapMyFitness, acquired by Under Armour, and led Helix, a top genomics company. Robin began his journey as a pro cyclist and was known for his climbing prowess. Robin is an incoming board member for Endeavor, Colorado. Endeavor, Colorado is a part of Endeavor Global, supporting more than 2,500 high-impact scale-up entrepreneurs in 45 markets around the world. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Hi, Robin. Thanks for being part of this.
Good to see you.
Yeah,
Thanks
absolutely,
for having me.
for certain. So you live in Boulder. What got you to Boulder? What does Boulder mean to you? Why do you stay in Boulder?
Oh, Boulder has so many meanings to me. Well, I'll tell a little story first. I like to tell stories. So I was coming down from Flagstaff yesterday. I ride up there quite a bit. And I was going by Andy Hampston's old house. He won the Giro d'Italia. And remember the story?
You won what?
The Giro d'Italia.
Okay, wow.
And he was really amazing pro bike racer back in the late 80s, early 90s. And there was, when I was very young once, I came up and Ron Kiefel, whose dad owned Wheat Ridge Cyclery, and he was also professional for 7-Eleven. They had invited me up, and I was like 15 years old. I ride up from Denver. Then I get up here, and they're like, oh, we're going for 100 miles, and we're sitting out on their porch up there on 9th Street. And they're like, yeah, we're going for 100 miles, no big deal. And I'm like, okay. I'm like 15-year-old kid. And then we go for this 100 miles. I'm absolutely destroyed. I get
So you're a 15-year-old kid here in Boulder?
Yeah, I rode
Okay.
from Denver up to Boulder, stop at his house, have like a little, bagel or something, and we take off for this 100-mile ride and get back to his house. And Andy just looks at me and he goes like, how are you going to get home? And I go, well, I guess I'm going to ride back to Denver. So I had this like monster 200-mile day. But that was a lot of my childhood. A lot of my childhood was like coming, between Denver, Boulder. Had a lot of friends that were up here that were bike racers, and would come up here for that, and race up here a lot. And there's other business owners in the area like Dirk Friel, who started Training Peaks, and I used to race together as kids. And so growing up, there was a lot of inflection points that I had with Boulder, whether it was bike racing.
But you grew up in Denver
In
itself?
Denver, yeah, in
the city
downtown Denver.
Downtown Denver?
Literally in downtown. I mean, I went to 9 different Denver public schools and moved
Wow.
16 times before I was 16.
Why so much moving before you're 16?
My mom was single mom. My grandparents did live in Wheat Ridge, but she was kind of always flirting from, away from paying rent on the last month. So she'd try to jump somewhere and go somewhere new. And
Okay, very creative.
Yeah, very, very creative. So we moved a lot, and but I, because I started bike racing so young, there was just a lot of connections to Boulder, and so, when we had the chance to come back here, it's been actually, it was just the 5-year anniversary since we moved back. But my wife and I got married at the St. Julian. We,
Oh, wow.
spent a lot of time back and forth, even when we lived in Denver up here, and so and then obviously I went to CU and then graduate school. And, even though I finished in Denver at CU Denver, and, I just, for me, it's a place that, while people call it the bubble, I feel like from, like what I love to do and how I love to interact with the outdoors, it's maybe one of the best places in the world. And I have been a lot of places. So I feel like I have good context to why it's such a great place.
Yeah, and we're going to spend a lot of this time talking about your current company, Outside Inc. But before we get into Outside Inc., let's talk about other aspects of your life. And you mentioned you used to bike ride a lot when you were growing up. Tell us about your cycling endeavors.
Yeah, I mean, I started riding when I was 9 years old. It's funny because in the YPO chapter here is a guy named Mo Siegel, who was the
Yes.
founder of Celestial Seasonings.
Hmm.
And I remember when I moved back to Boulder 5 years ago and joined the chapter, because I was in YPO in California and Barbary Coast, and I remember somebody saying, "Oh, Mo Siegel's in the chapter," and I was like, "Are you talking about the founder of Celestial Seasonings?" So then the first time I saw Mo, I go up to Mo, I'm like all kind of excited, a little giddy to see him, and I'm like, Mo, like, would have never been a bike racer if it wasn't for him, because not only did Celestial Seasonings sponsor the Red Zinger, which became the Coors Classic,
Okay.
but they also sponsored an event called the Red Zinger Mini Classic, which was really to get young riders into cycling. And it was, held in different stages, like North Boulder Park and a number of things all over the
All in Colorado?
all in Colorado. This was all in Colorado. And, so as a young kid, this was an opportunity to go and, race, in a really well organized event because it was well sponsored by Celestial Seasonings. And so, that for a lot of riders that grew up in Colorado, that was sort of their foray into bike racing. And so, did the Red Zinger, probably, I don't know, maybe at least 4 times from 9 to 13. And then, Colorado also at that time, and that we're talking about in the mid 80s, was basically a hotbed for junior cycling. I mean, between California and Colorado. And so a lot of the guys, national team riders like Bobby Julich and a whole bunch of others, Jonathan Vaughters, who runs the EF team now, and others grew up racing here. And so I was sort of in the mix of that, was like, not only spending time at the Olympic Training Center, but, really growing up and racing extensively, not just in Colorado, but they would take us all over the country and, race in other places.
You were a climber, right? You were known
I
for
went uphill
climbing?
very fast. That is true. I was a very tall kid as a young kid. I was 6 foot, I think, by the time I was 13. So I was tall and I was extremely thin. I was about even when I turned professional, I think I was 132 pounds. So I was a very, very lean guy. So going uphill was definitely the skill set. So it was just I guess I would just say Colorado was an incredible sort of place to grow up. I don't think I would have been in cycling. Forget it just about the Celestial Seasoning things, but think about just the environment that was in and around cycling. And luckily, because there were a lot of bike races, my mom never saw any bike races. So I had to go with other people. I had to bum off of other people's dads to get rides and families and stuff. And so I was in people's cars and obviously with the national team a bit, and, sort of doing that on a really regular basis until I turned pro when I was 18 and went to Europe. And, I would say had certainly you and I know others that had more illustrious careers.
Yes, we do.
But for me, it was like my college. I didn't go to college right away. I went to Europe and, lived in Switzerland for 4 years, and cycling is what took me there. So the great thing about something like cycling, and I don't care, I talk about other sports this way too. I don't care if it's like my daughter's into horseback riding now or other things, is that these are incredibly strong communities, right? You go somewhere and it doesn't matter where in the world. I mean, I can show up. I mean, when we went to the Middle East and you reach out to people and they're immediately like, yeah, come for the ride. No big deal. And they want to kind of, see, who you are, what you're about. But once you're there and you're in that, I always found cycling, no matter where I moved in the world or where I was, whether it was, after I quit racing, was just this automatic community, of people that would get together and, ride. And, in some ways, Boulder is no different than that, right? There's a huge cycling community here. And, that was certainly one of the things that drew us back. But that was my again, my sort of childhood was very fortunate to grow up in a place like Colorado. Cycling definitely got me out of trouble, that's for sure, because there's a lot. I could have gotten a lot worse trouble than I did.
And a lot worse than you did. Maybe we should talk about the trouble. But when you guys want to look on the internet, see what kind of trouble Robin got into that we don't know about.
Yeah. There's certainly some things, but again, cycling kept me out of a lot of trouble compared to my sibling. But it was. Again, it opened up the world to me because I got to travel all over the world to places like Colombia and to Europe and to Asia, racing. And so it just for me was definitely living in Europe for those 4 years after I, moved over there was definitely like my college. I mean, living with a very international team. I mean, we had Japanese riders on the team. We had, Russian riders, Polish riders. So it was a very international mix, and a lot of times we would be in the same place at the same time. We'd be traveling in the same cars for 100 races a year. And so again, I just feel like sports, no matter what it is, gives you this opportunity to really not only find a community, but ultimately for me it was about seeing the world.
Yeah, I've never been a big cyclist, but there was a period of time, a number of years in Boulder, where I too got the fever, and I ended up doing the Ward ride, 70-mile ride up over Ward a few times, which is just an extraordinary difficult ride, but fulfilling when you get it done, including kind of the year after I had cancer, I was able to get up over the hump there, and it just made me feel really good. And One other experience I had was riding a bike from just north of the Boulder area all the way up to Cheyenne, Wyoming. It was a 80-mile ride in 90 plus degrees heat in time to see the finale of the Cheyenne Frontier Days, which was just crazy. People remind me it was my idea to do it, but about 15 of us did it, and it was just crazy.
Yeah.
And so those are really good memories.
But you got to see a lot. I mean, I think that's the
Yes.
thing about. I mean, the great.
There's
thing
not a lot to see between
Yeah, that's
Longmont
fair.
and
That's fair.
Cheyenne.
That's fair. You got to look over at the mountains until you get away from them. But I think that's the great thing about cycling specifically is that there are many amazing places in the world, and
Yes.
I mean, I've ridden a bike over 500,000 miles in my life, and so
Wow.
I have seen a lot of roads. I've seen a lot of places that most people don't get to see.
So back to the topic of Boulder, certainly the outdoor lifestyle of Boulder is a big part of what this community is all about. What else about the Boulder community jumps out at you? What is it that attracts you to it, and where would you like to see it evolve over time?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think that there is a strong startup community here. I mean, if you think about things like Techstars that was started here, and and certainly investment firms like Foundry and others that certainly at times put dollars to work here, and a lot of other small family offices and small VCs and things like that. So that certainly for me was an attraction point. But I think having 3 kids and having gone from Austin, I mean, all of our kids were born in Austin, and then we went to Palo Alto. There definitely was a draw from a family perspective, right? Like, very, relatively safe community, let the kids run outdoors. I mean, we live over not too far from you, Dan, you know that. And the kids love the block that we're on, and there's tons of kids there. And, I think the school system's really good. So a lot of it from a family perspective was very appealing versus, say, moving back to Austin or, some other place. And so, and it's also big enough that for me, certainly the community of people, I knew a lot of people here. So that was appealing to get back and have a community of people that, I had interacted with before. And so I think generally both for family as well as for work, it made a ton of sense. And then I think it's funny as I have acquired businesses and outside, what I've realized, and there's pluses and minuses of this, but a lot of the people that work for us tend to work in what I call very outdoorsy places. I mean, we have people in Bend and people in, Vermont and, Framingham, Massachusetts and things like that. These towns that tend to attract, Santa Fe, New Mexico, where Outside was, tend to attract a certain outdoor type person that we have a lot of at, Outside from an organizational perspective. And so Boulder was a great place to do that. I mean, 160 of our, Colorado people live within the Denver Boulder area. And, I think it certainly has helped us attract and retain and recruit people into the organization.
Yep. So you're kind of one of those great examples of someone who grew up in sports, interested in outdoors, and was able to transition career-wise into businesses that were all about outdoors and recreation.
Yeah.
Maybe that started us earlier in your journey with I think, what was your first startup venture?
Yeah.
The mapping company, and take us through that journey.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. My startup, it's interesting. My startup life, I would argue, really started with the first company that I worked for. So I worked for a company called Lipper Analytics that did mutual fund analysis for the whole industry. And I was employee number 25 or 26 in 1995 as basically an intern when I started. And, and then the company sold to Reuters in 1998 for 120 million or something like that. And I remember my boss, Steve Lipper, walking in and saying, here's your check for your options. And I was like, oh, so that's how this works. Like it was sort of
Was it a big check?
It was for a guy my age, it was a big check. I mean, it was, a couple $100,000. And I was like, this is a big deal, And so I was sort of like really intrigued by the process. Obviously, I didn't immediately go out and start something. I went to, worked for Reuters for a little bit. Then I went to Kansas City and worked for American Century, and then I got recruited.
And what did you do for Reuters? I know you
Yeah,
were
so
traveling around the world.
initially I was an analyst when I started at Lipper, and then I left. When I left Reuters, I was still like a senior analyst doing mutual fund analytics and equity analytics. Then I went to American Century to build this essentially product platform for risk management for American Century, and that's really when I started to get into sort of the technical side of the business. And then when Reuters recruited me back to run global research for them, I also helped launch Reuters.com. And that's a lot of when I learned about the ad business and certainly the data businesses, which Reuters was big in. So I was sort of getting that foundation of even how I think about what we're building now from those experiences. And then Reuters wanted to move me to London. I have this tell this funny story about how my stuff was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean because they had sort of said you have to move to London, work visas, everything. And I just really, I loved London. I was there a lot for Reuters because they were in Canary Wharf. And so I was there 12, 15 times a year during that 5-year period when I came back. But I didn't really want to move there. And so I got recruited by Wellington in Boston and literally called my boss. And I was like, Michael, his name was Michael Peace. And I was like, Michael, I'm not coming to London. I'm moving to Boston. And he was like, what? Your shit's in the middle of the ocean, man. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going. Yeah. So you're going to have to ship it back. So I didn't see my stuff for like 6 months. But then, I went to Wellington, and the idea for MapMyFitness, which was, my first real startup, I would say sort of, was predicated on a couple of things. The first thing is, obviously I went to Europe and I was on a cycling trip, and we had a bunch of Europeans and Americans there. And we were literally sitting at a dinner table one night, and somebody just said, God, I'd love to come back to Europe and know these roads that you're taking us on from living here. And I was like, there's no there's guidebooks, but there's nothing where me personally, I can send you a route and you can then follow that route and go do it. And so that kicked off this whole idea.
And this is roughly what year?
This was 2005. And it took another year to I hired you might know a guy named Jim Tanner here in Boulder that started Wall Street On Demand. It was like a digital company.
I know Wall Street On Demand.
Yeah, so he was the founder, and he was a big runner.
Yep.
And so he had a couple of engineers that I had worked with that I had hired to start building MapMy. And I went to lunch with him one day, and he was like, he goes, "What's the name of your company?" And I go, MapMyRide. And he was like, "Oh." He was like, do you know that there might be a MapMyRun? And I was like, what? Because I wasn't a runner. Wasn't even thinking about it. And so I reached out to Kevin Callahan, the co-founder, and was like, what are you doing with this website? And he was like this sort of a beach bum in San Diego. He was a Johns Hopkins engineer. And so one of my developers had quit in Boulder because he was going to architectural school and got a full scholarship. And so I called Kevin and I was like, look, originally I was just going to buy the domain from him because I didn't want these multiple domains out there. And I go, Kevin, do you want to, quit your job and come build this thing with me? And Kevin was like, yeah, I hate my job. He was like some SEO consultant, and he just absolutely hated it. And so he left.
So he had a different job, but he had MapMy.
He had started this, and it was a really basic thing. Yeah. And what MapMyRide was building was a little bit different, but it was enough. It was close enough that we were like, hey, we should join forces.
And you were trying to really build a business. He was doing this more on the side.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't left Wellington, so I was a little bit moonlighting, but I was really thinking like, hey, this is something that could turn into a big training platform and a route sharing platform. And so he left, and we opened up a small office in downtown Denver and started recruiting some engineers there. And I was still working for Wellington.
Put 2005 in perspective, though, when it comes to this, because like now we take that kind of stuff and say, well, what was the big deal? But what was the environment like when it came to internet applications of this nature? I mean, iPhone didn't even come out to 2007.
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand how, first of all, the only device in the market really, if you go back to when we were I was riding bicycles, there were these computers like Cat Eye and Avoset. But the way that they worked, they didn't have GPS. They didn't have any mapping capabilities.
Probably weren't connected.
No, they just had these sensors on your bike that basically told you how fast you were going based on the cadence of the wheels and with magnetic sensors essentially. Yep. And then there were cables running across your bike and, all this stuff. And so the idea that, I mean, I'll never forget, like, because we used to do these like user sessions, and you'd have these people come in and we'd ask them, like, we'd have them explain, like, okay, so today, if you're like training for something, like, how do you figure out distance? And they'd be like, well, I get in my car and I drive around for 3 to 5 miles and I come up with a route, and then I just run that route over and over and over again. And we were like, okay, so you get in your car, you document this, and then you never run a different route, because they were like, well, I don't know how far the other route is.
Yeah.
And there were these, then Garmin came out with these devices. There's this huge brick of a thing that went on your wrist. That was the Garmin 205, and the thing was, the satellites were terrible. Like, these old GPS systems were not great. And so, the reality is, when we launched MapMy, and you basically, you open up the website and you go in, and this was even before it would snap to roads and stuff. Like, you had to zoom in on the map to the point where you literally would click every dot to get the right accurate distance, because the way the vectors work and everything. And so, we launched this thing, and we had 1 million users on the web creating these maps by hand before the iPhone launched, or before even like Snap to Roads and Google Maps started to come along. And, in terms of like creating some of this functionality.
So the users would actually do the work of.
They would do all the work.
Routes.
It was all UGC. I mean, it was, I would create a map, and then I would send you a link, and we had this sort of cool functionality where you would print the map.
UGC, user-generated content.
User-generated content, yeah. And the user would, like, you would print the map, and then you would fold it into 4s, and you would get a Ziploc bag, and you'd take it with you. You'd like, it'd show you the route, and, on the bike ride, you pull it out.
Which was technologically advanced back then.
Oh, no, I mean,
that was a big deal. You're probably showing off your little bag.
This was huge. It was a huge deal.
Yeah.
And so, we had a nice little business. It was a little bit over $1 million selling advertising to bike stores and running stores and coaches and things like that. And then in 2007, we entered a Google contest for Android. Okay. And we built this. There's a great, if you guys want to insert, there's a great YouTube video of this original app that's still out there from 2007.
How would someone find that?
It's on YouTube. I'll send you the link. But it's a great demo of what we had to build. A demo, shoot a YouTube video of it, and then send it to Google for the contest, and then obviously the APK for them to basically test the app. And we finished 3rd in this contest, and they cut us a check, and they were like, "We're super excited for you to be on Android." And we were kind of like watching the market, and we were like, I think Apple's going to make it to market before Android. So we literally took the money we won from the contest, turned it around, and built an iPhone app.
There you go.
And then, so then we had, 2 of the first 100 iPhone apps, and Map My Ride and Map My Run. And
the first
100.
Wow.
We launched in July of 2008 when the store launched. It basically July, I think it was like July 10th of 2008 or something. And you might remember this time. So markets were unfolding, not in a good way.
Well, 2007 is the year we started Zayo. So yes, yeah. I know those times.
You remember. So, Bear Stearns had melted down. We launched the iPhone app in July. And at first, people have this impression of when the App Store launched that it was just like skyrocket to the moon. Well, it wasn't really like that. The first couple of months were a little bit anticlimactic. Like, we launched in the store, we're getting a couple of thousand users a day. I mean, it was a good use case, right? You go out with your phone, but there were battery issues and people didn't know how to use the GPS. But the use case was clear. When we would go out and watch people using their iPhones with Map My Run or Ride working, and they would get off they'd stop their run, and they would hit save, and it would create this beautiful map for them in real time. Mm-hmm. And you just look at the expression on their faces, and you were like, wow, this is amazing technology. Because what it did was democratize the use of GPS, right? In a very, very basic use case. And people would be listening to their music. They would be, they'd have the phone for safety. And I remember, basically that summer, it was a little bit of a trickle. I hadn't left Wellington yet. And then Lehman melts down. Markets are in total turmoil. And a friend of mine called me on November I think it was like November 8th or something of 2008. And he's like, and I worked in finance, by the way, so this is never something you want to hear. Is he goes, have you seen the New York Times today? And I was like, no. And he goes, have you seen the Wall Street Journal? And I was like, no. And he was like, have you seen USA Today? And I was like, nope. And he goes, you've seen Barron's? I was like, nope. And he goes, you better go grab them all. And I was like, I was literally shitting bricks because I was like, you as a finance person, you never wanted your name in there unless it was like positive, right? Mm-hmm. So I go down, I'm at 75 State Street. I pick up all the papers, and on all of them is this huge because AT&T was the exclusive partner for iPhone at the beginning. And there were these huge ads, and MapMy was one of the apps on the home screen that was in the ads.
Really?
Yeah. And it was like a rocket ship up into the right. So they started selling.
So you got free advertising by accident?
Well, I mean, not really by accident. I mean, I would argue that for the first 5 to 7 years of iPhone and Android, if you were one of the first apps, it was nothing but free advertising. You had the momentum of the App Store and being there, and people were downloading the top apps. And I mean, there were days MapMy was literally the #1 app in the store because the use case was so good. I mean, we were above finance apps, above. At the time, there weren't really social apps, not yet, right? They were just sort of starting out. And so there were days we had the #1 app in the store, whether it was Map My Run or Map My Ride. And that was all free promotion by Apple and AT&T or, whatever promotion they were running at the time. I mean, you want to talk about guerrilla marketing. I mean, the Apple used to have us come into stores and speak like as app developers. And I would go into these stores. And I literally, this was before, like if you go to the Apple store right now, all the phones are locked down. What you see on the home screen in the stores are locked down. But at the time, I would go into these stores and I would change every I would change every phone to have MapMy be prompted on there as we would go in to speak, or I would stop in some city and I'd go into the Apple store and I'd change all the phones. And these store people would walk up to me and they'd be like, what are you doing? And I'm like, nothing, don't worry about it. And I'm like changing the phone screens and everything. They don't obviously let you do that anymore. So, we were very, again, we were a big part of the original Apple ecosystem. We got invited by them a lot to be out there, and it really was a rocket ship. I mean, it was literally from that time. I left Wellington in December of 2008. My boss literally called me. He was like, you are not the smartest person I've ever met. Because I was like, I'm going to go start an internet company. And he was like, I don't think that's a great idea. Don't you see what's happening in the world? And he was like, you have a job. You have a really good job with us. And I was like, I'm going to go do it. And, and then, it was sort of interesting because the App Store was, progressing nicely. We went out to try to raise capital in 2009 and, actually have a good story about venture capital, the Rockies, which is where I met Austin Ventures. But I went to Silicon Valley first and, went all up and down Sand Hill and, pitched them on the ideas. And a lot of venture capitalists, they're cyclists, they're runners, they're triathletes, they're, they tend to be pretty physically active. And I remember walking into all of these venture firms and them just being like, we think your idea is super stupid. No one's going to carry their phone on the bike or running or any of this stuff. And I'd be like, no, you don't understand. Like, it has everything you need. It has safety, it has music, it has other applications, audiobooks. Like, I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Everybody's going to ride with the phone or run with the phone. And they were like, no, this is a terrible idea. And then I got invited.
It is fun to reflect back on the times you were told no on something.
Oh, so
who
many
told
no's.
you that? And
yeah,
you got to resist.
You got
I told you so thing, but it is fun to remember the
I also have a good story about Brad Feld, which is Brad was big runner, and so I took MapMy up to him, and he was like, "Love it." Unfortunately, we just invested in Runkeeper, which was one of our competitors, and so I was like, "Okay, no problem, Brad." So Brad Foundry didn't invest in us, and then I got invited to venture capital, the Rockies, and to speak, and I did a demo and. Mike Dodd, who was the partner at Austin Ventures, he and I started sort of forming a relationship, and Austin Ventures invested in us in March of 2010, and $5 million in the business, and it was sort of a race, back. I mean, it was like every one of our competitors was getting capital, so we were like, we have to get funded in order to kind of keep the race going, and so we got funded. And it was it was a little bit off to the races. I mean, we hired a lot of people in that mix, and just kind of started really improving the product. Obviously, the iPhone got better, battery life got better, all of these things got better. And like I said, for me, it was just like there's this map at my office of every workout start point around the world in 2013 or 14, and it's like hundreds and hundreds of millions of start points across the world. And to me, that was the true democratization of like fitness.
Yeah.
It was the beginning of anyone being able to track what they were doing.
Because everyone tracks their fitness. They even how many steps that you walk. You're always
Yeah.
looking how many did I get into.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's now,
Yeah.
I got 3 devices on right now. I got an Aura ring on, I got a Whoop, and I got an Apple Watch on. And normally I'm wearing a CGM, and now all the stuff seems sort of normal. Like people don't actually look at you funny. But I remember going to these conferences in like 2006 called Quantified Self. And
Quantified self.
yeah, and these people were strange, Dan. These were like I
So
thought,
they fit right here in
Yeah.
Boulder.
Oh, yeah.
They wouldn't even stand out.
yeah, I mean, it was really funny. I mean, it was like these people were tracking how many times they went to the bathroom a day. They were tracking like, every calorie, weighing every piece of food. They were tracking like how long they were on email. I mean, it was crazy the things that they were tracking. And so it was, and I understood that from my cycling days because I have books and books and journals of like what I ate every day and how much I weighed and things like that. But it was early days. Like you were like, these are some strange people. Like they the types of things they were doing. Now I joke like all of us quantify everything. Like it's all the data is quantified. But at that time it was definitely a little strange for sure.
Yeah. So part of the theme of this podcast is Colorado Innovators, and part of the purpose is to hopefully inspire others to do great things, by learning from some of those who've been there and done that. And one thing I want to summarize in the story you've told so far is, and this is consistent with messaging I give to folks, is if you think you want to start something up, the right path forward often isn't to go with a startup. It's to go with an established, ideally scaling up company. Because if you're in that mode, you're seeing what success looks like. And the story you told how you learned the importance of data and kind of where data was headed in the context of the financial world, but you translate that into your passion of cycling to kind of get out in front of a new trend, how to apply the coming iPhone with apps and fitness tracking. Probably wouldn't have gotten there if you didn't spend several years in the data world, in the financial data world.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certain you could look back at your career and say the same thing, right? Of like places that you were at that taught you basically to get ready for whether it was building Zayo or other things, right? And I think for me, I know there's a number of like gurus out there that will say things like, don't pursue, like do your passion on the side and don't pursue your passion like as the way you make a living. And I just fundamentally disagree. Like
Yeah.
I think that what I learned, and sort of like not only with MapMyFitness, and I'll talk a little bit about like how even after I sold it, some regrets maybe that I had and concerns I had about finding that again, right? But I feel like I got super lucky when I started MapMy, and certainly not only what gave me the passion to put so much time and energy into it was that I was extremely passionate about like solving the friction problem for other consumers, other cyclists, other runners.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, the marriage of what I learned at Reuters and American Century and Wellington and and my background in cycling, marrying all that up together into something that like I could wake up every day and like jump out of bed for, like to me was, it was the ultimate find. It was like that, it's like as if we were traveling across the country and then went into the hills and found gold. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. How can I possibly make money and do all these things at the same time? And I think it was the foundation of what I had learned at places like Reuters that set me up for that for sure.
Okay, so let's get back to the MapMy story. So things are going well.
Yeah, I mean, we were on this amazing trajectory. We were growing at, 100+% a year on users and revenue and everything. And, I will tell a part of the story that was really hard for me as a founder. Austin Ventures, who was a little bit more like a private equity shop in 2012, we had raised several rounds of capital. When we went to raise our Series C, we raised it from a strategic. We actually raised it from Casio in Japan, which was a super
Mm.
interesting experience. Going over there and interacting with them and the original founder, Mr. K. Casio himself. But Austin Ventures' model was that they were like, we're going to put in professional management. So there was a year where it was actually only about 9 months where they had recruited an external CEO, put me into the chief product officer role, and man, I was pissed, really, Dan. Like I was like, I don't understand. You're winning. You're growing the business at triple digits on every measure that we can show on the board, and then you're like, hey, we're going to put in someone else. And I was like, luckily, I stuck it out. I definitely was the right person to run product and during that period, but then it didn't work out. They put me back into the chair, and less than a year later, Kevin Plank shows up, and he was like, the only reason I'm buying the business not only is for the technology, but it's because of you, right? And
Mm.
so
And Kevin Plank is,
the founder of Under Armour,
yes.
yeah, and it was a sort of interesting story. So he calls me in the summer of like August of right around my birthday and his birthday. Ironically, we're like 5 days apart in age, and he calls me in mid-August, and he says, he just sort of pops onto the phone, and he's like, "Hey, this is Kevin Plank. And do you know anything about Under Armour? Do you know like?" And I was like, first thought in my head was like, do I have a single piece of Under Armour product? Like, do I have any shoes?
Because Under Armour was turning into a big deal.
Oh no,
around then, right?
they had gone public, and
Yeah.
they were definitely a big deal. And Kevin had grown the company to I think it was a $3 billion market cap company at the time. And and he was like, "What are you doing with this?" And I was like, "Well, I'm trying to build a big digital sports brand." And obviously Nike had gotten into Nike running and Nike training and Fuel Band and things like that. And Adidas was, you know, being acquisitive as well in the category. And so I flew out to New York. We had hired a bank to either help us raise money or sell, potentially sell the business. And we had a couple of other inquiries, United Healthcare and some other people that were looking at it. And so I fly out. Kevin comes up to New York and he meets me. And it was really funny. My team was up there, like our CFO and our chief product officer and other people were up there with me. And we're at the Allen & Co. offices. And Kevin like grabs me and he pulls me aside into another room. And he's like, "I just want to talk to you. Forget about the bankers. Forget about everybody. I just want to talk to you." And so we go into this room and he shows me this video that they had created around this this woman called Future Girl. And Future Girl was this, again, video still out there. It was basically this vision that Kevin had.
Would that pass the woke standards of today?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it was a vision that Kevin had around a connected person, and it was like in the video, she has a shirt that's connected that like is reading heart rate and other devices that are sort of like reading data and and sensing what's happening from her. And he literally like gave me this line, like he was like, "I made this video for you." And I was like, "Well, that's strange. I mean, okay." But I'm watching it and I'm like, no, he's got a real vision for this. I understand where, what he wants to build. He wants digital to kind of be the first touch point. E-commerce for them was a $200+ million business. And so he was like, "Look, I want to buy MapMy." And literally within 20 days, we had an LOI with Under Armour, and the deal closed in 65 days or something like that when we announced it in November 14 of 2013. And as I say, I mean, Kevin changed my life. I mean, it was obviously a big outcome.
It was a good exit.
Yeah, we sold the business for $150 million to Under Armour.
Wow.
And it was, at the time, it was only 20 million in revenue, 20 million users. And
how much investment had gone into the company?
We had only taken about $14 million. So it was not like we had taken, actually it was closer to 20 because Casio came in only about 9 months and they put 5 million in. So it was about 20, and 20 million users, 20 million in revenue and 20 in capital. And so investors were obviously
Very
excited.
happy.
It was a great outcome, and that we had given about, which is again another one of my big philosophies. We had given about 20% of the company to the employees outside of myself, and so they all had, I think there were 13 millionaires created, and a lot of really good outcomes for people. And in some ways, that was the greatest part of the story. I remember we had this big. Actually, Dion was there. Dion Sanders was
Oh,
there,
really?
which we could talk about. Dion. We had this big party in Austin at Austin City Limits, and
How did Dion end up
well,
there?
he was doing work for, he was sort of an Under Armour paid athlete.
Okay, that makes
So
sense.
Kevin invited all these athletes. We had like Bryce Harper and Michael Phelps, and I mean, it was just it was a crazy lineup of people to come talk to the MapMy staff at this party. It was sort of like, it was the first acquisition Under Armour had ever done. So it was kind of a big deal in the history of the company, So we were there that night, and celebrations going on, and everybody's having a great time, and the athletes are speaking, and the staff is obviously super excited. But what struck me was the number of people on my team that came up to me and were like, obviously a very different outcome than I had, but they were like, I just paid off my car, or my family's taking a vacation they would have never been able to take, or we paid the house off, or, again, for 13 of the team, it was a very, very life-changing event. And so for me, that just had a really big impact, because I really, again, rewind a little bit to the Lipper days when they got bought by Reuters. I just started to realize the impact that if a team has equity in something, what the potential sort of like value creation can be out of that, right? And I stayed at Under Armour for 3 years. We bought a lot of other companies. But we spent a lot of money. We bought MyFitnessPal for almost $500 million. We bought 7 other companies that sort of added the total up almost to $1 billion that we did while I was there. And we doubled the e-commerce business, because we were doing like this micro personalization. So if you ran 5 miles on MapMy, I would send you an email right after that was like, hey, Dan, great job, celebrating that. But then I'd be like, here's a head to toe outfit that fits you that you can get 30% off of right now. And that translated into really growing the e-com business, because we had 250 million emails of people to go after. So I had a great time at Under Armour, but the catalyst to outside was that I went to Kevin at the end, and I was like, Kevin, I really think we can build.
When you say the end, what?
When I was deciding like if I was going to stay or go, and I was like, Kevin, we can build $1 billion subscription business if we build like Red Bull Media, like if we build like a big media company inside of Under Armour, along with the platform that we had built. And Kevin just looked at me. We were at dinner at some seafood place, if I remember correctly, and he just looked at me and he goes, Robin. And he had already, like, Under Armour was already starting to have a little bit of some challenges in the core business, like around fit and some of the women's lines and stuff like that. And so he just looked at me and he was like, Robin, you've already spent $1 billion. We're good. Like, I can't do any more right now, And so that was sort of the catalyst for me to say, it was time to let someone else take over. And, it was a very smooth transition, and we were still living in Austin. But I had a non-compete for a couple of years because I couldn't build another fitness app. And so that's what sort of led me to go run. I got recruited by Warburg Pincus to go run a consumer genetics company, which was a real stretch in some ways. It was like,
now you're a deep science.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, it was very different world. I mean, it was similar in that we were building a consumer platform to connect apps and build apps on top of this ecosystem. Like, we had partnered with Mayo Clinic and Mount Sinai and other people to build apps for them that, leverage the genetic data. So there was a real consumer angle to it. And, like competing with, Ancestry, like our partner was National Geographic. So we did like Ancestry data with National Geographic, but it was our data underlying that. So, it was a consumer market that was growing. I mean, Ancestry and 23andMe at the time were really growing fast. And so Illumina, who was the strategic partner, they were the ones that really wanted to get into it and build a consumer business around this idea of like sequence your genome once, and then run it, and use the data over and over and over. So it made sense that they recruited me, but I tell the story, Jay Flatley, who was the CEO of Illumina, I went to his house in San Diego, and we're sitting there at lunch, and he's like, so, totally understand, like, we really want you to be here. We need a consumer CEO. We need someone that's built consumer apps. And obviously you have a lot of history in this. But he goes like, tell me what you know about like biology. And I was like, well, I think I got like a C in biology in high school. And he was like, it's okay. Don't worry about it. You'll have plenty of scientists
This is
around
after
you.
they brought you on
Oh
board.
yeah. Well, it was like, it was like sort of my final initiation lunch, before it started. They'd already given me the offer and everything. And so, but my now the chief science officer and one of the founders, James Liu, he runs the company now, and I think it's a great fit. The business pivoted from B2C to B2B and is doing very, very well now. And so it was a really good learning experience for me. But there were some things that I identified during that time. Like I definitely didn't want to work in healthcare. I was out at the FDA a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, Dan, it was so painful.
For an entrepreneur,
I was just like
hard. It's
moved
torture.
so slow. I mean, you were in telecom. I mean,
We have the regulation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nightmare, right?
Yeah, no, not interested.
Yeah, so I was like, I got to figure out a way to get out of healthcare because as we pivoted the business to B2B, the business was doing really well, but I was like,
But you must have been exposed to a lot of advanced ideas about the future of genomics.
oh yeah,
And,
I mean,
and combine that with what you've learned since then. Maybe we go off on a little bit of a tangent. How do you think about the future
yeah.
of genomics and humans?
The thing that it opened, I mean, one is just worked with some absolutely brilliant people. I mean, I think one is there's no one that can light money on fire like me, Dan. I mean, at one time we were burning like $5-6 million a month at Helix. Like we were just lighting it on fire.
I laugh because
that's
I
probably
came
not
from
a lot.
industry.
That's probably not a lot.
That's
that's
nothing.
fair. That's fair.
Maybe if you put a B instead of an M at the end of the
yeah,
sentence.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was funny in that, like, for me as being part of a small startup like MapMy, I was terrified by it. But just absolutely worked with some brilliant people. I mean, I think at the peak we had 50 PhDs in molecular biology on staff, and I obviously I was fortunate enough and certainly honored to sit in rooms with them and understand where they thought the world was going. And in retrospect, nothing happens as fast as we ever think it's going to happen, right?
Until it starts to happen, because AI took forever.
I mean, quantum
doing nothing.
Yeah, boom, and here we go, right?
And I think genomics is going to be.
It's going to be.
Yeah.
It's going to be huge.
I think everyone talks about AI. They're starting to talk about quantum. We talk about blockchain. But the thing that's really going to change everything is when you layer in kind of what genomics is going to do to the future of humankind.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's so the opportunity that I had sitting in those rooms and understanding where things were going, in some ways, I would say sort of led me back all the way to, like these quantified self conferences and like thinking about how all of this data is going to be interconnected, how all of these things, even how something like activity or exercise impacts your, not just health, but like how it can impact you and potentially future generations, or like even nutrition, and how that impacts you. And so like, when you start thinking about, again, AI, how all of these pieces of the puzzle come together around human anatomy, human psychology, mental, all of these things, I'm pretty convinced that we are going to get to the point where between all, like, as an example, I have probably 15 years of, at least semi-annual, if not quarterly blood data, right? You start pairing that with genetics and biome data and other things, as well as activity, what you ate. Like when we acquired MyFitnessPal at Under Armour, it is the largest food preference database in the world. And what I mean by that is like someone like Brian Leach runs Ibotta. They probably have the biggest database of food purchasing, like what people purchase in the store. But you don't know who in the household ate that food. Whereas MyFitnessPal actually knows who ate it because you're sitting there putting it in, right?
Yeah.
You're like recording it for yourself, right? So, when you start thinking about all of those data pieces together, daily weight, daily sleep, daily, food intake, your genetics, your blood data, What AI is going to do is start to figure out and make these connections in real time of things that will change things about your life, like daily living, activity, all of these that like you're almost unaware of right now. Like I'm using example, I can get on the bike some days and I can just be like, God, I just don't feel very well. But it could be down to the nuance of like, is my potassium too low? Right? Like we're going to start to know that stuff in real time, I think, in the next decade, all of it being associated back to, like from a genomics perspective, what things you might be good at might also dictate. I mean, there were some pretty scary things. Like there was a lot of research going on, and I think the scientists at Helix would argue that it wasn't far enough along, but there were things like, well, what happens if you know from genetics how smart someone's going to be? Like, that's a bias immediately,
Yep.
right? Like if you're an employer and you were using that in data, that could be very, very tricky, right? So there's a lot of stuff, I would say, pluses and minuses of as this information gets out there, what will happen from a bias perspective. The one thing for me, I would say, not only did I grow up in the middle of downtown Denver, and most of the time of the schools I went to, I was the minority, not the other way around. But then I had the chance to travel over the world and really, to me, get accustomed to a lot of different cultures. But if there's anything that genetics taught me, that it's like we are so close together as human beings that it's ridiculous to me that
Which is
people even look at
amazing.
skin color.
Yeah,
Like it's so,
but
like
the
having been in
lack
that world.
of more variability is pretty
There is
amazing.
we are all so close together. It's ridiculous that anyone treats anyone differently. It really, it's just it does not make any sense at all. And so, I think that combination of things, I just think, is going to proliferate. But the problem is that there will be new things that create biases. So like
Well,
maybe,
not just biases. There's going to be new things that create differences.
oh
like
yeah. Well,
genomic
well, when you talk
differences.
about CRISPR,
Yeah.
CRISPR technology is a whole nother thing that is, it's pretty scary that, how like people worry about things like dirty bombs and like,
Mhm.
nuclear. I mean, I'm way more scared of the fact that I can go on YouTube and buy a CRISPR kit from someone for $19.99 and actually manipulate my genetics at my house based on like a CRISPR kit
Mhm.
than I am of
And
nuclear.
some people are doing that, right?
Oh, yeah, but it is, I mean,
You
I'm
don't hear
telling
many
you,
stories about it, but they're out there.
oh yeah, I mean, you go online, go on YouTube and search for CRISPR kits.
Yeah.
There's some people pushing some pretty radical ideas of things
Have
that
you
you can
heard
do.
what's come out of that, where people have used it and what
I mean, there's all
they've
kinds
done?
of things. There's things there are people that think by, what I call micro injecting, CRISPR technology, that you can change muscle structure. Certainly there are some big things out of CRISPR around disease that are super
But are there
interesting.
examples of individuals who've used these kits and
Oh,
what has come out of it?
I mean, there's people that have died. I mean, there's definitely stories of people injecting themselves with CRISPR kits that have died, right?
Yeah.
So are there any like the challenge is that it's like it's still too early and they don't understand the technology well enough unless you're like I would say in a lab, right?
Mhm.
So, but when you talk about where CRISPR is going, but there's a scary part of it. So like let me use an example. Let's take something like uh you know um MS. Okay. And let's say that they know that there are 5 genes that basically are that create MS as an example. The question is that what if what we don't know
Is what you would do
is,
about it.
well, no, CRISPR, as you change the genetic modification, technically could
Yeah.
solve some of these diseases, right? And that's what they're working on. I mean, there's
Sure.
all kinds of examples of like there was just a story recently of a kid being cured of blindness from using CRISPR. But the problem when you look at it at a mass level is that if you have something that's in the population, like first of all, humans have survived because of genetic diversity. Like, and what I mean by that is like when there's a lot of theory that even when we mate, that we look for them and try to maximize genetic diversity, right? Like even though we don't know it, it's more like through pheromones and things like that that cause us to look at mates in that way. But the reality is that disease, there are questions about whether or not that diversity, like a mutation like MS or others, if you take it out of the system, like in other words, if you clean up every single person, MS is eliminated, right? It's possible that something could wipe out the whole population. It might be that set of people that have MS are actually protecting the rest of the population from being wiped out by something. So there's all these like downstream effects of things like CRISPR when we start messing with our biology that you wonder, like, what are the actual ramifications from it? Because if we're all, like, if you go back to the fact that we're already very similar, like in all of us, less than 3% of genes are different, right? The rest, more than 97% are identical, right? So if you start to eliminate the last 3% and we all look the same, couldn't one thing wipe us all out?
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of scary, right?
Yeah. I think about, I haven't heard that variation of it, but I think about it more in the case, not that there'll be less variability, but that there'd be more variability introduced by playing around with genetics. You know, my little Johnny's going to be taller and faster, and than your kid because I'm going to.
But is that less or more? If you think about it, what if
it applies to everyone?
Yeah, but go back to like it's interesting. Last night I was watching this World War II thing that Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg did on Apple. And I was thinking to myself that genetics is scary because if everybody wanted to be one race with one eye color, with one hair color, you get to this point where you are talking about less diversity because people think that that's what's going to make you successful. Or forget about looks. Go back to intelligence. Let's say that it is genetically driven. What happens when people start using CRISPR to make people smarter?
Yeah.
Is that diversity or is that singularity?
Well, singularity if everyone is able to do it at the same time, but I think it's
you're giving certain people advantages for sure.
Yeah, the risk and the threat and the unpredictability comes from it's not going to happen to all populations at the same time. It's going to be those with money and maybe those with money who are in environments where they could get away with it.
Well, or even scarier, maybe people with power.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
the
way to get power.
It's really, it's not like, what I would say about my time at Helix was that there were two things that made me terrified.
Great to get us back on track.
Yeah.
Good one.
Two things that made me terrified. The first one is that today, Helix is the largest genetic data set in the world because first of all, it's very different than 23andMe and Ancestry in that those companies use technology called SNP technology, which means they only have maybe 2 or 3 million data points on you. Helix was running full exomes or genomes, which means they had literally hundreds of millions, if not billions of data points on every person they were running genetics on, and now they have millions of people that they've run it on. So I was literally waking up some nights just terrified we were going to get hacked. What if a sovereign country had hacked Helix and all of the people that and I was like, I can't do this. I cannot be involved in this anymore. I have got to get out of this. So that was one terrifying thing. But I also think like, I don't know, Dan, like, I wake up a little bit naive every day. I wake up, I ride my bike up Sunshine Canyon and kind of enjoying my life. Honestly, sitting in these rooms with these molecular biologists scared the shit out of me. Yeah. In some ways, I wanted to still be naive rather than be on the cutting edge of like what was happening in that technology. And so for me, I just wanted to get back into the outdoors and try to figure out how to get other people outdoors, which also does affect, you in a very, very positive way.
So what's, I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyways, what's the mission of Outside?
I mean, it is super simple. We just want to get people outdoors. And I think there are some alarming statistics going on in the world right now. Even youth sports is way down. I mean, I just actually did a big LinkedIn post about youth sports and what's happening there. And, if you look at the average kid in the US, certainly when I was growing up, it was like you go outdoors until it is literally past dark. And then you come back indoors, right? And now the average kid in the U.S. is only getting 7 to 20 minutes a day outdoors.
And what does being outdoors do for you that's good?
I mean, look, most of the population is vitamin D deficient. I always use this example, which I really feel like humans need to recognize, which is there's this scene in Superman when Harry Cavill is, he's Superman, obviously, and there's this moment where he finally breaks free of the machine and he flies up above the world, and he opens his arm and the sun is hitting him, right? And he gets all of his energy back. Humans are not any different. Like literally, part of our ethos and our fundamentals are made up of nature, right? And like the connectivity to the earth and the sun is like super important. And so when you're sitting inside on a screen, or like we're sitting indoors right now, this is not really, as humans, what we like, how we evolved, right? We evolved in the outdoors. I mean, we were only in darkness when we were sleeping, basically, right? So like this is a very abstract thing for the human anatomy, right? And so I think that's the other thing. You're going to start to learn all kinds of like what happens when you stay indoors too much or you're on screens. And I think we're seeing the effects of that right now. I think if you look at, mental health in the US, if you look at, I mean, especially in teens, like this is being driven by screen time. It's being driven by, certainly time indoors. And, and then there's another trend. There's
vitamin D was a great way to fight off COVID, right?
Oh, I mean, COVID, I mean, you could argue all kinds of diseases, right? But no question. I mean, you need sunlight. Like it is absolutely critical to us as human beings. And so I think there are many, many health benefits of being outdoors, but there's proof that like, have you heard of something called earthing or, like basically there's very, very strong scientific evidence that if you take off your shoes and you just walk in that grass out there for 10 minutes, it will lower your blood pressure, literally.
Really?
Yeah, because you are actually getting reverse ions basically back and forth from the earth, and you are connecting with it, and it is actually, bringing your blood pressure, heart rate, all of those things down. So like I tell people all the time, I don't care if you can't go hiking in the national park, like, or you can't get to what, North Face or others sort of present as the outdoors, right? Like from a visual, perspective, going to Mount Everest is what I joke about. Like, most people think that like going outdoors means I got to go climb Mount Everest. That is not what people need to do. People need to just for, 10, 20, 30 minutes a day, just literally go walk in the grass without shoes. Like it, and I don't even mean like hard exercise. You get a lot of physical benefits by literally, like you don't have to run, you don't have to ride, you just literally take your shoes off, do a damn phone call outdoors. I don't know, like, but just go outdoors. And so I think, yes, we look at it from an activity perspective, whether that's kayaking, hiking, climbing, cycling, whatever it is. But we are trying to message to the audience and the base that just going outdoors in a park is absolutely critical. It is absolutely imperative for your health.
So how does outside, which is media, right? So you're
we're not media, Dan. I'm going to talk all about that.
Not media?
No.
All right. Well,
we have media.
We have media. So your roots are media. Your roots are media. Where is your future?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the businesses that we bought, I sort of bucket it into three things, and this is the way we talk about it. So the first part of getting people, wanting to go do these things is inspiration. And, visual media or audio is the way to do that, right? Like, the example I give is, if you went to see a Warren Miller film, you leave that theater like, I cannot wait to get on some skis or a snowboard. Like you don't walk out of there going, yeah, I can't wait to go home to get on my iPad. That's not the way you feel when you leave. You're like, I cannot wait to go do that thing. So the media part or the inspiration part of our business is like, what do I put in front of you that I think is going to trigger that moment or inspiration for you to then activate? And activate could mean a lot of different things, right? Like I said, activate could be, how do I remind you just to go outdoors for 20 minutes, to do a phone call? Like, how do I get you to do that? But it also means things like, go back to my example of starting MapMy. It was being in the Dolomites. It was being in Europe that actually created that situation, right? In the Alps. And, and so I feel like travel is a big part of it, like the experiential part of it. How do I, like, I'm using example. We just wrote this great article. I mean, we write a lot of travel content, but, wrote a great article about the top 10 surfing spots in the world, or another one about the top 10 cities to ride in North America, as an example. And when I talk about taking it from inspiration to activation, the reason that we're different and what we're building is different is that the activation part is, if you think about like an article, and I talk a little bit about what I would call the problem with the media businesses and why, social media and some of these other platforms have taken off. But when you think about the historical context of like you opening up an outside magazine, like you opened up and you get like the story I tell, when in 1978 or 9, my dad, who my parents were divorced young, but every once in a while we'd be with my dad, and he loved to hike and camp, right? And so he threw an outside magazine at me like in 1978, 1979, and he's like, "Hey, this is where we're going." And on the front cover was Arches National Park, right?
Mm.
And I tore the whole thing up. I cut the articles out. I cut all the pictures out. I put it up on the wall because it was all about visualization. Like I had to get ready to go to this place that I was going. And so the old relationship is you open up a magazine, you read about this great place to go, and and then you start to work on the trip.
And that
right?
the outside magazine that you talked about while you were young, that is the same.
It is the same
Outside
magazine
as
that we
you're
have
now.
today. It's the
Yes.
same. Now we obviously have a lot more digital and
Sure.
a lot more digital, sort of readers, but it's the same exact, company
Yeah.
that we largely bought, 3 years ago. But the transaction was you read that article, you get inspired by that article, and then I leave all the work up to you, Dan, to figure out how you're going to go to that place. Like Outside or Ski Magazine or Backpacker, they didn't do anything to actually get you there, right? So as an example, now when we write an article like this top 10 places to ride in North America, we also have a company called Trailforks and Gaia GPS that do mapping like MapMy did. And in the article, we had, I don't know, this article 2 weeks ago, we probably had a couple 100,000 people read. In the article, we embed the maps from Trailforks for where to ride.
Mm.
People click on those maps and they save those maps in Trailforks. And then we also know, did they go out and record it? We know that they went from reading the article, downloading the app, saving the maps, to actually converting and actually going to do the ride and potentially buying premium services from us as part of the mapping tail. And then the last part of the journey, so it's like inspire, activate, and celebrate. And remember the story I was telling you about, like when we used to watch people and they'd finish their run and they'd look at the map and they'd have like this moment of joy?
Yeah.
Well, we all celebrate our, adventures in different ways. But like if you go do an Ironman, we have a company called Finisher Picks that does like the official photography for Ironman and other big events. And the reason people buy photography is because they, in essence, are celebrating, or the reason that when you finish a ride, you want to look and see the map is because you are celebrating the moment. You're like, look what I did. Like, Danny was giving me a hard time about the Be Strong ride. And like, I get as much joy out of looking at my map when I'm done as anyone else. Like, I'm like, hey, to your point, rode up to Ward, rode down to Lyons, got back here in one piece. And that was a big moment. It's like, I got this done today. Like, this is a big celebratory moment. And so what we're trying to build is this sort of continuous sort of network around all the pieces. Like, we're looking at acquiring travel companies and that actually do the booking for you. So like when I write the article about the top 10 surf towns that include which hotels to stay at, maybe even some restaurants you should go to, that why should you have to do work after that? I should just literally say, hey, Dan, do you want to book the trip right now?
Yeah.
Like, why am I making you do all this work of like trying to figure out how to do that? I should connect those dots for you, because if you have that great continuous loop, what are you going to do again? You're going to go do it again. You're going to go find the next adventure, and then you're going to share those adventures with other people, and other people are probably going to want to do them too. So we're trying to build a full ecosystem of certainly media as part of it, but a platform like we're about to release really what I would call the vision of the company at the end of August. We've been building this, the outdoor social platform. We're launching a model where people can load UGC into the system and follow people and share their activities through devices like Garmin and of course Trailforks and Gaia. And this was really the original foundation of bringing all these companies together, was this platform that we've been building on top of it. And I'm about as excited as I could be. Like literally we're in the throes of testing it internally and getting ready for it to roll out at the end of August. And this was the true vision of the company. Like this was bringing it all together, was this platform that we've now been building for 2.5 years.
Oh, so it's really
It's coming
taking those
together. It
next
is
big
real. It
steps.
is really coming together right now.
Yeah.
And like when we launched this, like we built a social platform on MapMy, and so did Strava. Strava's activity feed, which is their social platform. You know, you can follow me, I can follow you. When both MapMy and Strava and people like Runtastic and other people launched these, like for MapMy, we went from being what I would call a sort of singular training log. So like you would go start, stop, save, or integrate with your Garmin, and you'd go back to your training log and you'd say, look, you know, like I did a great job. I'd set some goals. I'd have some training plans. But the distinction was there was no way to share it with other people. And when we launched the ability for this to share with other people, so like, again, you go for a ride, you post it on the social platform, and then you share it, it exploded. I mean, MapMy 10x their traffic after we launched the social platform. So Outside's about to do the same thing right now. And I'm pretty convinced like this is the big growth engine, as well as putting other components into it, basically.
Great. So we've largely touched on a couple aspects of what Outside is. We talked a little bit about cycling. So by inference, Outside has to do with cycling. We talked a tiny bit about skiing. But talk about the full range of outdoor recreational activity that Outside touches on.
Yeah, I mean, look, if I go through the stages of the things we bought, the first businesses we bought were the endurance brands, so like Velo News, Triathlete, Women's Running, Podium Runner. So largely focused on endurance. Then we bought another company here.
And when did you start Outside?
So I started buying up businesses in late 2018. That's when we bought the endurance businesses. And then I basically took over. I came back to Boulder in summer of 19 after I had left Helix, took over the business, incorporated it. Actually, our 5-year our incorporation in Delaware is next week.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the 5-year is. And it was all my capital at that point. So I was just using my capital. I hadn't raised any external capital. And then when we went after, and there was a few companies that we sort of pulled together in that first mix of things. And then when we went after Active Interest Media, which was here locally, they owned things like Warren Miller Films, Ski Magazine, Backpacker, Yoga Journal. They owned some food brands like Clean Eating. That was really the catalyst for like, okay, this thing is going to be, we're going to try to touch every outdoor activity. We're going to try to touch everything. And we even want the balance of nutrition in there, because nutrition's a big part of how you experience these things. We wanted, certainly we wanted things that you could do from a cross-training perspective. So like we own a publication called Oxygen, which is in the fitness space, muscle and performance. We own, Yoga Journal. So these things were technically sort of indoor a little bit. You can certainly do yoga outdoors, but it was about how do you prepare for skiing? How do you prepare for cycling? How do you prepare for running? So those businesses, we brought them together. This was before we acquired Outside. We were already thinking about all the breadth of things that you could do: skiing, snowboarding, yoga, backpacking, climbing, magazine. All of these things were sort of in that first sort of breadth endurance publications. But it wasn't until, like, I would say buying Outside catalyzed it. So the story with Outside was my mom lives in Santa Fe. I had gone down there in 2019 after this was sort of, I'd already bought the endurance brands. And I reached out to Larry Burke at Outside, and I was just like, hey, do you want to have, lunch? And funny enough, he's an interesting guy. He scheduled the lunch for 37 minutes. I don't understand. It literally came across my calendar. I was like, this is super weird. But we ended up sitting there at the Hotel Santa Fe for like 3 hours talking. And when I left, I said, if you ever think about selling Outside, please give me a call. And he sort of chuckled at me. He was like, you mean to your little endurance brands? Like, it was a little bit like, I don't know. And then literally 1 year to the day, he calls me back. And in COVID, obviously, they had a tough year because of advertising. And
it was mostly print then, right?
Well, so there were two businesses. There was the print and digital on Outside Magazine. And then they owned Outside TV. And Outside TV was basically had started as a local TV network. So we have an FCC license. We own antennas in places like Tahoe and Vermont and other places. And then we have a network of affiliate stations that run the 24/7 TV channel. But it started out as a linear local network for sports, right? Basically. And so they own those two businesses, and he had to sell them both at the same time, essentially. So we decided to sell them. We raised the Series B from Sequoia and Michael Moritz, and we were kind of off to the races. But at that same time, we closed on 6 businesses and raised $150 million on the Series B to roll up all of those businesses. And at that time, we bought Gaia GPS in the mapping space. We bought an event registration platform. We bought the event photography business. So that's when the vision of like having a unified sign-on, unified profile, unified membership sort of all came together as we sort of rebranded to Outside, started to put the network together. And then we bought some other big assets like Pink Bike, which is the largest mountain bike site in the world, and then Trail Forks, another mapping site. But that was really, so February of 21 was really the big catalyst for sort of bringing it all. And my view is like, we don't do enough water sports today. We want to do more in water sports. And that could be everything from, more surfing to more kayaking to, river sports, as well as like ocean sports, things like that. Eventually golf is outdoors. Why couldn't we get into golf? It's a very participatory thing. But I would say our focus is around participation. So what I mean by that is like, obviously you might have recently heard like Minute Media bought Sports Illustrated after some of the challenges with the Arena Group. And, I wasn't very interested in a business like Sports Illustrated, even though it has an amazing legacy and brand, because ball sports are not really participatory. In other words, the people that watch them don't watch them and immediately walk out the door and do football or basketball. And again, maybe a little bit in soccer.
Some do, but not very many. Yeah.
Not very many, right? And so I would say our focus is purely on things that people actually participate in, because to me, it creates a different level of interactivity and desire around things like gear, around, just a whole number of areas that really travel. Like you will literally take your family to an Ironman. You will take your family to the London Marathon. Like these are big participatory experiences. So that's really been the focus of the company, is how do we pull more things in, as well as build this overarching platform that really unifies the whole thing and really would cover anything outdoors. I really don't care. I mean, even walking to me is a part of what we are trying to get people to do on a daily basis.
So look out a few years. You talked a little bit about kind of things that are coming together now that really set you up as more of a platform, more interactive, more activating. But look out 4 or 5 years. What is Outside in your vision? What does it become?
Yeah, I mean, the way that I think about it is, well, a couple things. One is that we know that most people experiencing outdoor and sort of active lifestyle participation are not doing one thing. Like, and it's extremely episodical. And what I mean by that is, so this year you might say, hey, I'm going to start running a little bit. I'm going to go ski. I'm going to do some hiking. And then next year, you might have a new social group. You might, like I always say, like big events like getting married or moving. Like if you move from New York to LA, your outdoor experiences are going to change. You're going to do different things because of the people that you're interacting with, and vice versa too. Like if you move from LA and you're surfing and you move to New York, you're probably going to go to run groups more than you are going to surf, right? As an example. So it doesn't, like these big life events change things. But the other thing about activity is that and I say it's episodical in that, do you know the reason why there's so many fitness trends? Like, I don't know, Soul Cycle to, bar to Pilates to, it's because people get bored.
Yeah.
They literally sort of run out, they run out of doing all the classes and they want to look for something new. And so that's why, there's punch boxing and P90X and all of these things, because people do get bored. And so over a lifetime, people might do 12 to 15 activities. And so the way I think about it is not just, one, that you're doing multiple activities. So you might be an expert in one thing, but you're a beginner. And so how do we keep you on that journey of going through that? But then it's also episodical in that you might switch sports and switch things that you're doing in a year. And so how are we there for you in that moment around inspiration? How do we get you into the right events? Because I did this Be Strong ride here, but I might not do it next year. I might do something else. I might go do a gravel event or a mountain bike event, or I might go do a hiking event or something like that. And so we want to be there at that moment to go through that journey with people, no matter which activity they're doing and no matter what stage they're at. And so when I think about the future, it's about connecting all those dots. How do I make the experience from the moment that you touch our ecosystem? How do I get you through that whole journey? Like, if you read an article about those top 10 surfing trips, Dan, I want you to go surfing. I want you to go try it. I want you to go experience this moment where, even if you're a beginner, how do we get you the right instructor? How do we get you on the right board? All of those things matter. Same thing if you're just starting out cycling. How do we get you with the right group of people to ride with, or the right bike shop, or how do we get you on the right trip? And one thing I will say, I love like where e-bikes are going as an example, right? Because like
You see so much
it's
more.
like the iPhone. It's democratizing cycling. It's getting like, if you go to a lot of these big like Back Roads, which is a big organization that runs all these global trips around the world. It used to be that one person might go on that trip for cycling or hiking, and the other one's like staying at the hotel doing spa. Now on the cycling trips, like everybody goes, everybody, like no matter which person came there for the experience, everyone goes. So it just, for me, it's about how do we deliver that experience through, again, not just showing you the media, but then getting you to go do the thing, whether that's a trip or that's a activity out, where to hike, etc., and then ultimately celebrating it.
So are there companies you can think of that, not so much in the outdoor space, but companies that you would say outside is sort of for outdoors what that company is for their space, that kind of spans media activity, engagement?
I mean, look, you could pick out something like, I could use a few examples. I think what Disney is doing is not dissimilar, right?
That's what, when I asked the
yeah,
question, I was
yeah.
thinking,
you have
there's
this
a Disney
experience where they
correlation.
obviously have all of this inspiration through the characters, the movies, the films, ESPN, Hulu, all of these. But a lot of what they're trying to do is to get you to come do these experiences. Even Disney obviously has a massive endurance program. They have all these marathons and half 5Ks and half marathons. But it really is about these experiences that they get you to go do, right? Or it could be at a store that they, their physical retail presence, or at the parks, or and the vacation. If you think about the way they sell
Cruise.
you the vacation or the cruises,
Yes.
it really is about connecting the inspiration to activation. And then what do they do when you're there? They take your photos and they get you to buy the photos because they want you to share that not only within your family, but with friends, because they want other people to share the magic,
Yeah.
right? And, and then I use the New York Times. Like, I think what they're doing with like Wirecutter and games and all of that is an interesting parallel. Obviously, I don't think as good for you as what we're doing. But, certainly a similar model in that they're putting a bunch of pieces together that people might be interested in, and then trying to activate them through games and experiences and things like that. But one of the reasons, what's interesting about building companies, Dan, is that, and I think even when you're raising capital, is there's a lot of investors and people, I would say even employees, who sort of get wrapped around this thing that like, you got to just do one thing really well. And I actually love the complexity of our business. Like, I love the diversity of it, because like, even if our ad business isn't going great, I got a great membership business. I got a great event results, like event registration business. So like, I really enjoy the complexity of figuring out this like episodic journey that these individuals are on, and how to keep them in that journey, doing it over and over and over. And that's part of the complexity of what we're building, right? And in terms of what we want to pull into it.
But you're building it out in layers. You didn't start by doing everything at once.
No,
And
no.
I do see certain startups, a couple that we're involved with who instead of picking your lane and being really good at it, and know you could build from there, they've tried to do 6, 8 things all at once. Like, you can't do that. You have to, maybe you don't have to narrow it down to one, but you have to really early on figure out what you can be good at. And once you're good at that, you can layer on the more complex strategy around it. And the fact that you have such a tight focus as a theme, and you have credibility. You've built businesses before, so a lot of earlier stage founders haven't built something. So when they start with complexity, they're probably going to end with failure versus your case where that's part of the building a major category, major brand that is not just traditional media, but maybe starts there and builds something that's much more than that. So, I'm an investor, as you know. I'm both an investor through Next Ventures, Lance Armstrong's fund, but also directly into outside. So, it's been fun seeing you at work from that perspective as well.
Yeah. I mean, and when you say like in the future, I mean, I'll sort of maybe we can wrap a little bit with like, things that are happening now and kind of where I see things going. But like, there are big parts of our ecosystem that are huge categories that we want to bring in. Like we're looking very closely at weather as an example, because like not only is weather becoming more extreme, but as people understand their sports better, like whether you're on the ocean or you're up in the mountains or you are, you're surfing and you need to know what the breaks look like, or, you're going on a big ride and you know what the conditions are going to be in the mountains versus here, like weather is an absolutely critical part about that for you to have a great experience. So like we're looking at weather, we're looking at travel, we're looking at more fitness. But probably the biggest news that by the time this comes out that people will know is that I'm actually acquiring MapMyFitness back from Under Armour.
Really?
Yeah, so it's closing at the end of the
Wow.
month, and it has almost 100 million users on it, and they've decided that they were willing to part with it and give it back to me at a fair price, and so I'm just super excited to have that sort of join the portfolio with Trail Forks and Gaia, and have a very, very big base of people that are sharing their outdoor active lifestyle adventures as part of the platform. So that's going to happen in less than 2 weeks.
Yeah, as you were talking about that and bringing the MapMy back into the fold, I mean, it must feel great to be running a business where you know that the customers you're serving and the employees that are part of your team, they're benefiting from what you're doing in such a significant way. I mean, I always like to say when we were Zale, like our bandwidth, is such a big deal, but, that's a bit of a stretch, but what you're doing, getting people outdoors, enjoying recreation, learning more, inspiring them, activating them. Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, and I like to. I hope that we are living, and I mean, actually today, we have two national holidays at outside that are called Outside Day. So one was in the spring for skiing, and the other one is today. So the rest of my employees are off today, hopefully
Oh,
enjoying the outdoors, which is
speaking of that,
just part of the mission.
before we wrap this up, talk about the Outside Festival. This was the first year for it. It went really well. I was there for part of it.
Yeah.
What is the Outside Festival, and what are your plans for that going forward?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, the kids were born in Austin. We lived down there for 7 years, and I think I've been to 10 or 11 South by Southwest. And so when I started outside, it really struck me that today the outdoor industry is a 1.2 or $3 trillion industry. Obviously has a huge impact. I mean, Colorado, I think it's 17% of our economy is outdoor recreation. But what struck me was that there is no consumer event in the outdoor industry. There was no event where you, Dan, could come and experience some of these things for the first time. Like maybe you could try rock climbing, or you could try, next year we're going to have a kayaking experience, like where you could literally come down. We're going to have a kids bike park next summer.
Yeah.
You could come down and try these things and really sort of get into them from a consumer perspective, as well as see all the latest gear and maybe see some, iconic people. Like this year we had Shaun White and Jimmy Chin and, Conrad Anker and other people that are just iconic in some of these categories that we're in. Diana Nyad that swam from, the Cuba to Florida, which she was, by the way, master class in speaking that she did at the festival. But I just realized there wasn't a space where consumers could come and do this. There were lots of opportunities for businesses that were in the outdoor to come and talk to each other and network and things like that. And so, when we started outside, it was sort of this, in the back of my head was this idea of could we create a sort of once a year cultural moment where all consumers could come and experience all these different things. And as we were sort of working on the format, we, outdoor retailer left Colorado. We went and started talking to the state and the outdoor recreation department, and they were, super enthusiastic about the idea of having, an outdoor festival for consumers. And So it took a couple years to come together. We got some funding from the state and the city, and hoping that will continue. But the idea was really to create this sort of cultural moment that everyone in the world could come to and experience these different things, and have music and food and all the things that go along with that. But have it be really a sort of an inspirational sort of moment where people were actually inspired and activating at the same moment, right? Like
Yep.
walking around outdoors all day. We got really lucky with the weather this year, but we had 18,000 people buy tickets and show up, and it was, the sponsors were over the moon. And the other thing about doing it in downtown Denver, which was really important to us and part of the mandate, was like, if you look at the feedback, hands down, everybody in the outdoor industry that was there was like, it was the most diverse outdoor event they had ever seen, because we put it in the middle of a city for this reason, and we made tickets super cheap for this reason, so that we could attract people from Denver, like in Denver proper, to come to the event. And we really saw that. I mean, more than, over 30% of the population that was there was non-white. And, we had 20% of the population that traveled from out of state. And it was just a real opportunity to me to create something that hopefully will go forward for many years. We're already planning this year, and, bigger bands and bigger experiences and everything around it. So, we're excited about the next steps.
Well, Crucial Ventures is too, because I gave them all a half day off.
Half day off to come to the
to
festival.
go outside on that Friday. So next year we'll make it a full day off.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun, and got to know you a little bit better as part of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Dan.
All right, man.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars featuring Robin Thurston. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Courtney Caruso with support from Emily Nataro, Gibson Seeger, and Allie Berman.